Okay, so imagine for a second, you are arguably the most famous writer on the planet.
Right.
You've written War and Peace. You've written Anna Karenina. You have The Wealth. You have the literal title of Count. You have global fame. You're basically the rock star of the 19th century. And then you throw it all away.
Yeah.
You spend the last 15 years of your life ignoring the novels that made you famous to work on this one project that you claim is the only thing that actually matters.
And it's not just some passion project, right? This specific work, this culmination of his entire life, it gets banned. The government in his own country forbids it for, nearly a century, because they thought it was too dangerous.
It sounds like we're talking about a political manifesto or, a spy novel. But we're not. We are talking about a book of daily wisdom.
Yeah.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Today we are unpacking A Calendar of Wisdom by Leo Tolstoy, specifically the Peter Securin translation. And I have to say, just looking at the background, the stakes here feel incredibly high for a book that's, on the surface, just a collection of quotes. It really is. Most people have this fixed image of Tolstoy the novelist.
Right, the guy who writes these enormous doorstoppers.
Exactly, about French invasions and, unhappy families. But this book gives us Tolstoy the seeker. There's this striking detail in the source material, a diary entry, where Tolstoy says that creating a book for the masses, something simple, something that tells a person how they should live, is, and I'm quoting here, incomparably more important than writing another novel just to entertain the wealthy for a few hours.
That is a massive rejection of his own legacy. It's like a Michelin star chef quitting to run a soup kitchen because he thinks fine dining is, a waste of time.
That's actually a great analogy, and the history of the book proves his point. It was banned in the Soviet Union specifically because of its spiritual focus. It wasn't until 1995, after all the reforms, that it was rediscovered and became a bestseller in Russia. So what we have isn't just a book, it's a survival guide for the soul that was suppressed for decades.
And the structure is fascinating. It's not just Tolstoy lecturing us. He calls it a circle of reading. He's curating the greatest thinkers of all time. Epictetus, Lao Tzu, Buddha, Christ, Emerson, and he's putting them all in a room together.
Exactly. And his whole goal was to answer one specific question. And it wasn't, how do I get rich or how do I conquer nations? It was just, how should a person live? How do you live a good life day by day?
So let's get into the actual mechanics of this good life.
Oh.
The first big theme that jumps out, especially in the January readings, is this concept of an intellectual diet.
Right. The food for the body versus the food for the mind.
So in the entry for January 1st, Tolstoy makes this comparison that feels uncomfortably relevant today. He talks about material poison versus intellectual poison. He points out that if you eat actual poison, like cyanide or just rotten meat, it usually tastes disgusting. Your body rejects it, you vomit, it's a clear signal. But intellectual poison, which for him was cheap newspapers or bad books, can actually be very attractive.
It's a prescient observation, isn't it? I mean, he's writing this in the early 1900s, talking about the penny press, but it applies perfectly to the endless scroll we all live in now.
Absolutely.
We just consume whatever is flashy or controversial. But the source material, specifically on January 9th, it makes this really crucial distinction that I think we often miss. The difference between knowledge and memory.
Unpack that for me. Because in our current education system, and honestly in most jobs, we equate the two. If you could memorize the facts, you're considered knowledgeable.
Tolstoy argues the exact opposite. He says, knowledge is real knowledge only when it is acquired by the efforts of your intellect, not by memory. And then he drops this line that just forces you to stop and reread it. He says, only when we forget what we were taught do we start to have real knowledge.
That sounds so counterintuitive. If I forget what I was taught, aren't I just ignorant?
Well, think about it like digestion. If you just swallow your food whole, it doesn't nourish you. It just sits there. You have to chew it, break it down, integrate it until it becomes part of you. Tolstoy is saying if you're just repeating what a teacher or a news anchor told you, that's just recall. It's not understanding. Real knowledge is what's left after the rote memorization fades away, and you're left with the concepts you've actually wrestled with yourself.
It reminds me of that Thoreau quote he includes in the January 1st section.
Yeah.
Read the best books first, otherwise you'll find you do not have time.
Precisely. It's about strict curation. There's another quote from Schopenhauer in there too, warning that constant learning, just taking in other people's thoughts without pausing to think for yourself, It actually softens the brain.
Softens the brain.
Oh,
Wow, that is such a visceral image.
it is. It implies atrophy, right? It's like if you never chew your own food, your jaw muscles weaken. If you never chew on ideas and just let the algorithm feed you, your mind goes soft. You lose the ability to think critically.
So the first step in Tolstoy's Guide to Living is basically a detox. Stop eating junk food for the mind. You have to curate your sources, which, leads us to the sources Tolstoy himself curated. We touched on this, but the mix of voices in this book is just wild. You've got Jesus, Confucius, ancient Greek philosophers, and then you have, as Tolstoy puts it, an unknown journalist from Oregon named Lucy Mallory.
I love that he includes her. It shows he wasn't looking for status or academic prestige. He was just looking for truth. And this brings us to the second major theme, this idea of a universal truth.
Right.
Tolstoy didn't stick to one dogma. He was a synthesizer.
So in the January 2nd entry, he talks about the outer signs of religion versus the actual essence.
Right. He says, let Persians bear their tavids, Jews wear their caps, Christians bear their cross. He lists all these symbols, the crescent, the hats. He calls them outer signs. But he argues that at the heart of all these different religions is a single unifying truth. Love to your neighbor.
Now, to a modern listener, love your neighbor sounds a bit like a bumper sticker. It's nice, but it feels soft.
Yeah.
But Tolstoy gives it teeth. On January 8th, he makes this distinction that really sharpens the concept. He notes that Christ didn't say, if you believe. He said, if you love.
And that is the absolute crux of Tolstoy's spirituality. According to the text, faith, the doctrines, the cosmology, that stuff can change. Our knowledge of the universe evolves, but love is eternal. So he sees religion not as a test of, did you get the theology right, but did you treat your neighbor right? It shifts religion from a noun to a verb.
And he has absolutely zero patience for people who enforce the noun part of it. There's this biting entry on January 31st where he talks about insolent people.
Yes, the greatly insolent people who establish religious laws that have to be accepted without question. He's critiquing the gatekeepers, the fundamentalists. He says that people who just chant, Lord, Lord, aren't the ones who get to heaven. It's the people who fulfill the will of God, which to him is just the commandment of love.
It's interesting because this feels very liberating at first. You don't need to worry about the hat or the ritual, just love. But then you get to the section on invisible work and you realize, oh, this is actually way harder than wearing a specific hat.
Much, much harder. Because if you strip away all the rituals and the public performance, all you're left with is the state of your own soul. And that's where the real work begins.
There's an analogy in the January 21st entry that really landed for me. It's funny, but it's also painfully accurate. He talks about a man standing outside in a storm.
The man who scolds the wind and the rain.
Exactly. He's standing there yelling at the clouds because the weather is bad. And Tolstoy says we'd all think that man is clinically insane. But then he pivots and says we do the exact same thing when we scold other people for being evil or difficult.
It's a brilliant pivot. He says instead of yelling at the wind, a sane man would just put a roof on his house and fix the windows. And in the same way, we can't just order the weather of the world to change. We can't force other people to be good. But we can fix the roof and windows of our own character.
We can fix the roof and windows of our own character. That is the invisible work.
And society doesn't value this work. That's the catch. Tolstoy points out that we think the important work is the visible stuff plowing, building, coding, posting on social media. But he argues that the work done on the soul is the most important work of all. Without that internal integrity, all the visible work is meaningless.
So what does fixing the windows actually look like? Because improving the soul is a little vague. The text gets really specific about anger, though.
January 23rd. This is practical, almost tactical advice for dealing with rage. Tolstoy is quoting Seneca and others here. And the advice is incredibly simple but so difficult. Stop. Do not move. Do not speak.
It says if you even move your tongue, the rage grows.
It's physiological. He writes, if your body or your tongue moves at this moment, then your rage will grow. It's about creating total stillness to break that feedback loop. We often think we need to express our anger to let it out, but he's suggesting that expressing it actually feeds it. And then there's the story of the bear and the log.
From January 30th.
Yes. Once you hear this, you see it everywhere.
I think this is my favorite part of the January readings.
Okay.
Walk us through the bear story.
Okay, so the story goes that in ancient times, to catch a bear, people would hang a heavy log on a rope over a bowl of honey. The bear comes for the honey, but this log is swinging in the way. So naturally, the bear pushes the log aside.
And gravity does its thing.
Right. The log swings back, hits the bear gets irritated, it thinks the log is attacking it, so it pushes it harder, which means it swings back harder.
Oh, I see where this is going.
He hits it with all his strength, and it comes back with enough force to kill him.
The punchline is, people behave in the same way when they return evil for evil.
It's such a perfect, visceral image of the cycle of violence. We think we're fighting back, defending ourselves, but we're just the bear hitting the log, creating the very force that will eventually destroy us. Tolstoy just asks, can't people be wiser than bears?
This idea of breaking the cycle, it transitions us perfectly into the next theme, which is social responsibility. Because Tolstoy isn't saying, work on your soul so you can be a hermit in a cave. He's saying, do it because we are all connected.
January 4th really drives this home. He lists the ways we're connected: industry, trade, art. But he says the most important connection is our common mortality.
If one member of the body suffers, all suffer.
Exactly. And this is where Tolstoy gets radical. I mean, really radical. He takes this idea of connectedness and love, and he applies it to the two biggest pillars of society: war and wealth.
Okay, let's talk about war first. January 22nd. He does not mince words here at all.
No, he doesn't. You have to remember, Tolstoy was a pacifist, but his critique is very specific. He says no exception justifies murder. But he goes after military service itself. He calls it a life of idleness.
That's a hot take. I mean, today, most people view it as service, discipline, sacrifice. How does he justify calling it idle?
Well, his argument is that in peacetime, it's a life where you are fed and clothed by the state, but you're freed from useful, productive labor, from farming or building. He says soldiers create these artificial ideas of honor of the regiment or the banner to justify their existence. But his core argument is theological. No government, no army has the right to destroy the divine connection between a human body and the soul.
So the state doesn't have the right to tell you to kill.
Exactly. He's setting the individual conscience above the state. He believes the law of God, which to him is love, supersedes the law of any king or president.
And if that wasn't controversial enough, he's just as hard on the rich. January 26th. This might be the most uncomfortable reading for a lot of people. He just says, a rich man cannot be merciful.
The logic is ruthless. He says if a rich man were truly merciful, he wouldn't be rich anymore. He'd have given it all away.
But what about philanthropy? I mean, we see billionaires giving away fortunes. Tolstoy seems to cut that off at the knees with that quote about charity.
Yeah.
Stop robbing others before you give money to beggars.
Yeah. With the same hand that we rob one person, we reward another.
You have to remember his context, his view on land and labor. He sees extreme wealth as being taken from the poor in the first place, through underpaid labor or systemic inequality. So for him, giving a little back as charity isn't virtue, it's hypocrisy.
He really traps you there. It's the bear and the log again. You can't use money gained through what he sees as force to then do good.
And this all leads to his view on identity. January 30th mentions Socrates calling himself a citizen of the world. Tolstoy rejects the idea that your primary loyalty is to your country or your tax bracket or your class. If you're doing the invisible work and you recognize that universal truth, then you're a citizen of the universe first.
So we have the intellectual diet, the universal truth, the invisible work, and social responsibility. But then comes the ultimate context for all of this. The deadline. Death.
You can't have a guide to the meaning of life without talking about how it ends. And Tolstoy, who was facing his own mortality when he compiled this, has a very specific reframe on fear. January 20th. He says, if you plan to go somewhere, you must have come from somewhere.
It's a beautiful thought. He frames death as a return to the source. If you believe that where you came from, the source that sent you here, is good, then returning there has to be good too. He says, it is much better to believe that everything which God makes for us is good.
It takes the fear out of it. It's not falling into a void, it's going home.
And he uses this lack of fear as a tool for clarity. There's this thought experiment on February 2nd that I think everyone should try. It's such a powerful way to cut through the noise, he asks. How do you cure indecision?
Imagine you might die at the end of the day.
Right. If you knew with 100% certainty that you were dying tonight, would you care about, and he listed them, the growth of your estate?
Right.
Would you care about glory, about the discovery of a new planet?
No. You'd probably just want to call your mom or, make peace with a friend. All the career stuff, the status stuff, it just vanishes.
He says you would wish to console an abused person or repair a toy for a child.
Repair a toy for a child. That is such a specific, small image, but it just breaks my heart in the best way.
It completely shifts the scale, doesn't it? We spend our lives worrying about the new planets, the big promotions, the legacy projects. But at the end of the day, when the clock runs out, the meaning of life is found in fixing a broken toy. It's in that small act of kindness. That's the science of living he's talking about.
So if we zoom out, what's the takeaway here? We have this massive book, banned for years, written by a literary giant who decided novels weren't enough.
Yeah.
It really feels like he's trying to deprogram us.
That's exactly what he's doing. The takeaway is that A Calendar of Wisdom isn't a book to be read, it's a book to be used. It's a tool. Tolstoy calls it the only real science, the knowledge of how a person should live. And unlike physics or geometry, this is a science where the laboratory is your own soul.
And the inputs matter. That's the intellectual diet coming right back around.
The inputs matter deeply. And on February 5th, the text gives us a final call to action. It says, all events start in thought. If you want to change the world, if you want to stop the bear from hitting a log, if you want to end war or inequality, you don't start with the event. You don't start with the protest or the policy. You start with the thought that created it.
To change the world, we must change the thoughts that create the events.
Oh, there.
It puts the responsibility squarely back on the individual.
Precisely. And that requires humility. It requires acknowledging that we might be wrong and that we have work to do on that invisible roof.
There's one last quote I want to leave our listeners with. It's from January 24th, and it feels like a challenge to anyone listening who thinks they've got it all figured out. A wise man seeks wisdom. A madman thinks that he has found it.
That's the perfect place to land. It just begs the question, are you seeking or have you stopped looking? Tolstoy, at the end of his life, after all his success, he was still seeking.
I think that's our cue to go fix a roof or maybe repair a toy. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Tolstoy's Last Wish.
A pleasure as always.
See you next time.